Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and I wanted to make a video talking about a little bit about John Green before we talk about An Abundance of Katherines in class, and just a little bit about him. I know a lot about John Green, so I'll try not to just ramble on and on. But as most of you know, I spent a long time of my life, over 2 years, researching and writing about him for my dissertation, and I've been a fan before that and since then. So I'm very familiar with his life and his works, and I've read everything he's written, and so I'll try not to fangirl too much, but just to give you some context about who he is. I'm bummed because I have a whole shelf full of John Green stuff in my office at campus, so I can't show it to you. I have all of his books in hardback and paperback, and I have little mini editions that are like this big, and I have a John Green bobblehead and magazines that he's on the cover of. I have lots of John Green stuff in my office at work, so I can't show you the books like I normally would, but if you ever come to my office, or if you've ever been in there, you've probably seen it. And if you come to it after all this, you can see all the John Green stuff if you want. I am wearing my John Green t-shirt, so if you're a fan of his YouTube series, the John Green where he grew a mustache for No Shave November, and then a fan put pizza, it's a whole thing. The Pizza John is a sort of a fan thing in his community. I also have my Turtles All the Way Down tote bag that I got when they came to Nashville and I saw them on tour. Up there on my shelf, let me show you. Up on this shelf, I have the Turtles All the Way Down tour poster, and then my mom got me this "Don't Forget to Be Awesome" artwork there as a present. That's the catchphrase of their YouTube channel. Don't forget to be awesome. They say that at the end of every video. And sometimes it's abbreviated to DFTBA. I have a necklace. I should have worn my necklace. It says DFTBA. It's a little DFTBA necklace. Don't forget to be awesome. So that's the the John Green stuff I have here at home that it's not in my office. But that's okay. You can see it if you come to my office. So let me just tell you a little bit about John Green, and then we'll talk about the actual novel in class. So Green was born in 1977. He was born in Indianapolis, but he only lived there for 3 weeks, and his parents moved to Florida. They moved to Orlando because his dad became the Florida State head of the Nature Conservancy, which is kind of a big deal. So his dad was, really big into the environment and worked for the Nature Conservancy, ran it, and so his mom was a stay-at-home mom. And she also was really involved in the community and organized things for the community and charity and things like that. So his brother Hank, if you watch the Crash Course videos ever through school, and if you know anything about them, he has a brother named Hank Green who became a scientist. He has a degree, a master's in chemistry, and became an ecology type scientist and environmental scientist. And he has shows on YouTube, like SciShow is one of his, and Journey into the Microcosmos is one of them. He has lots of different little science-based shows, and he hosts the Crash Course videos that are science. So I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, so his brother Hank is 3 years younger than him and was born in Orlando. They lived in Orlando all growing up, and by all accounts from Green and John and Hank and all of them, they had a very sort of progressive household, progressive family, and they would talk about literature over the dinner table, and they would talk about big life questions, and they were encouraged to sort of doubt and question things, and they would talk about the meaning of life and big things like that just while growing up over the dinner table. So they had a really open and progressive home. John also struggled from pretty early on, growing up and with mental illness and with not fitting in. He was not very successful in school. he couldn't concentrate for long enough. It's not because he wasn't smart enough, but he couldn't concentrate long enough on assignments to actually perform and do well and make good grades. And he was later diagnosed with a pretty acute case of obsessive compulsive disorder, which he still suffers from today, still is very active and vocal about going to therapy and taking his medication and having bad days and good days. So he's a really huge advocate for mental health even still. But growing up, John had he was bullied a lot in school because he was kind of just a weird, awkward kid. But he ended up going away to boarding school in Alabama for high school. So there's a boarding school in Alabama, Indian Springs, and that boarding school became the setting for Looking for Alaska. So if you've ever read Looking for Alaska or heard of it, it's set in a boarding school called Culver Creek, which is based on Indian Springs, where John went to boarding school. His eventual wife that he married, whose name is Sarah, by the way, she also went to Indian Springs, but they weren't friends. They became friends later in life as adults, but in Chicago, when they were both living in Chicago. But anyway, she ended up going there too. So a lot of his experiences from Indian Springs were immortalized in Looking for Alaska. So after boarding school, after high school, he went to Kenyon College in Ohio, and he double majored in English and religious studies with an emphasis on Islam. So he was really interested in sort of the intersection between Christianity and Islam and sort of how those two cultures merged, sort of spiritually and culturally, socially. He's really interested in the interactions between Muslims and Christians. And so that was sort of the emphasis of his undergraduate degree at Kenyon College. And he had a really good experience there. He had some professors that were a big influence on him. And after leaving Kenyon, his intention was to go on to become an Episcopalian priest. That was what his plan was. He was going to be a minister. And he was enrolled in a seminary program in Chicago. And so he moved to Chicago, and pretty early on, like in the first year of the seminary program, an early requirement that the students had to fulfill before they could continue on and get licensed, they had to do a sort of internship, I guess you could say, or a practicum or residency or something, like an experiential student teaching type of situation. But his was he became a chaplain at a hospital, a children's hospital. So he worked for several months to fulfill the requirements of his seminary degree as a chaplain at this hospital. And so his job was to basically give comfort to the patients who were there, like basically the parents of the patients whose children were in the hospital battling terminal illnesses and other kinds of injuries and sickness, and who were coping with the death of their children. And his job was to provide comfort and to pray with them and just kind of be there for them to have somebody to talk to. He still talks about how that was one of the hardest experiences of his life, working as a chaplain at this children's hospital, and how it's this sort of requirement for this practicum that his degree had. The intention was to sort of separate out the boys from the men, to like determine who really could handle it, and the clergy. And it really helped him determine that he couldn't handle it. Like after this time being the chaplain at this hospital, he dropped out of school. He withdrew from his program, and he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt at that point that he was not cut out for ministry. And the reason why, there was one sort of instance that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and there was a little girl was brought in. She was 2, and she had clearly had a pretty bad fall or injury. She was pretty severely hurt, broken bones, head injury, things like that. And the father who brought her in was distraught and upset, and Green prayed with him and offered him counsel and support and comfort. Well, the longer that they were there, the Green started getting suspicious that the child's injuries had been caused, you know, that maybe the dad was there and was feeling guilty because he had caused it. Turns out he was right. He was correct. His instincts were right. That turns out the father had hurt the child and then felt panicked and guilty and brought her to the hospital. And so because of that, Green's like, I comforted him, I prayed with him, but yet there is no part of me that feels like this man deserves mercy. There is no part of me that feels like this man is capable of redemption, right? And so as a priest, as a minister, I should be able to find something worth redeeming in every human being. But I can't find anything worth redeeming in this man. And so it's actually kind of big of him that he realized that early on, that he was not going to be capable of offering the grace that a minister's supposed to offer, no matter what the sin or crime or whatever that anyone in his congregation commits. So he sort of had a literal come to Jesus moment and dropped out of the program and was sort of drifting directionless for a while. But he got, since he had been an English major, he got a job in Chicago at a magazine called Book List, and they do reviews for books as it suggests. But he sort of became in charge of reading and writing reviews for the YA, like the YA young adult teen books. And at first he was like, this is really tedious, this job is not fulfilling. But then he got really into it. He started connecting with all of the books. He got that's reading all those books and writing reviews of them is where he says how he learned to write. You know, he learned to write from reading and getting prolifically read with all of these YA authors and the books. And so noticing the patterns, noticing what to do and what not to do. And so that job was really influential on him. And his boss ended up becoming his eventual mentor and editor when he started writing himself. Also, while in New York, Chicago, this is significant. He had a roommate named Hassan, which might be familiar if you've read our text for this class. He had a roommate named Hassan who was Muslim and very similar to the Hassan in An Abundance of Katherines. And so a lot of the little anecdotes and the things Hassan, the character, says, and the ways that Hassan in Abundance of Katherines interacts with his religion, most of those things come from Green's roommate Hassan after college. A lot of it definitely does come from his degree. Remember I said he had a degree in religious studies that focused on Islam. So he does, he has the credentials to be able to write an Islamic character. But some of the personality quirks and the jokes and the insecurities and things like that come from his roommate, Hassan, in Chicago. And there's this one instance that he talks about, like on his website, where he and Hassan were watching the news, and it was showing footage of somewhere in the Middle East, and it had been bombed, and it was just tragedy and all this stuff, and there was some building that had something in Arabic scrawled on it in spray paint, like garish, like red garish spray paint. And the commentator says something like, oh look, there's riots and they're defacing property, and the terrorists are spreading their hate speech throughout the streets and all this stuff. Well, Hassan, the roommate, started giggling, and Green was like, what's funny? And he goes, that says, and I forget it exactly what it is now that I'm trying to say it, but it said something like, happy birthday and a name, and then it was like, we'll celebrate when this is over, or something like that. It was like a happy birthday message. It was completely non-terrorist related, not hate speech related. It was a happy birthday message to whoever used to live there or whatever. So Green at that point kind of had this like epiphany, and so he wanted to write a character like Hassan in An Abundance of Katherines, who was a Muslim, but like a real person also, not just a stand-in for a cause, which is what he was noticing that a lot of Islamic characters in books were, that they were just kind of, they were their faith and that's it. There wasn't really anything else to their personality. So he was determined to fix that with Hassan and Abundance of Katherines. So while he was in Chicago, I keep saying New York. While he was in Chicago, he reconnected with his former classmate from Indian Springs, Sarah Urist, and they ended up dating and they got engaged. And the same day they got engaged, Sarah found out she was accepted to grad school in New York, which is why I keep saying New York. So they moved to New York for several years, at least a few, for her to go to grad school at Columbia. And she's an art person. So after grad school and living in New York for a while, they moved to Indianapolis, where Sarah got the job as a curator of the Indianapolis Museum of Art. And that's where they live now, is in Indianapolis. That's where their home is, and they have 2 kids. And John's still writing, she's still doing the art thing, and so that's where they are now. In 2005, I think, is when his first book, Looking for Alaska, came out, and it won the prestigious Prince Award. If you recall, American Born Chinese won the same award, the Prince, Printz, the Prince Award for teen lit. So his very first book, Looking for Alaska, based on his experiences at Indian Springs, it won the Prince Award. It's also a very significant accomplishment, because the year before that, when he was still working at Booklist, not married yet, he had a pretty significant mental breakdown. He had gone through a breakup, and he had a really, really significant bout with mental health. So his work, his mentor, his family, they all encouraged him he took a leave of absence for 2 weeks. He went home to Orlando. He went to therapy every day, got his meds adjusted, and he sort of had this sort of detox process of these couple weeks where he was in daily therapy, very intense monitoring of his meds to get them exactly right. And he, talks about how that sort of reset him and sort of put him on a path toward better mental health. But after that, he was able to sort of focus on his manuscript, get all of his stories in order, and he, published that first book in 2005 and won this, like, the best award you can win for his very first book. And Abundance of Katherines was his second book, and it was the runner-up for the Prince Award. So it didn't win the Prince Award that year, Abundance of Katherines did, but it was like second place. It was the runner-up for the award. So still very much beloved, and this huge accomplishment, this book he wrote. After that, he wrote pretty consistently, had a book come out almost every year. He had a book called Let It Snow that he wrote with Lauren Miracle and what's her face? She's another famous YA I'm gonna forget her name. YA author. She wrote Truly Devious and 13 Little Blue Envelopes. Maureen Johnson, thank you. Maureen Johnson and Lauren Miracle, he wrote Let It Snow with them. And Let It Snow came out as a Netflix movie around Christmas time. It was either this year or last year, so you can watch that. He wrote Paper Towns, which was made into a movie a while back. He wrote Will Grayson, co-wrote that with David Levithan. It's one of my favorites. It's probably my second favorite John Green after Abundance of Katherines. I love Will Grayson. And then his big one that made him famous, he wrote The Fault in Our Stars. And that one exploded. And he wrote that partly from his experiences working at the Children's Hospital and interacting with young people who have terminal illness. And also, there was a fan of his who had a terminal illness, and her name was Esther, and he sort of struck up a friendship with her, and she passed away, and so a lot of people ask, is Hazel Grace Lancaster really Esther Earl? You know, that's her name, Esther Earl. Well, no, like it's not a 1-to-1 comparison, but this one fan, her sort of experiences did show up on the page a lot in The Fault in Our Stars. Esther's real life experiences showed up in Hazel's thoughts and opinions and views on things in the novel. But after Esther Earl died, her birthday became a holiday in the John Green, Hank Green fandom. Esther Day is her birthday, and it's a day when you're supposed to show love that's not romantic. So you're supposed to contact people who you love, but it's not a romantic love, like your siblings or your friends or your parents or, you know, mentors in your life. Someone that is not you're not romantic in love with, but someone that you have love for in your life it's just a friendship. And you're supposed to tell them you love them. So that's famously the only day of the whole year that John and Hank tell each other they love each other. It's kind of a funny thing of theirs. So anyway, those are, after The Fault in Our Stars came out, he didn't publish anything else for, I think, 6 years was the hiatus. And it kind of was becoming a thing, right? Like, does he have writer's block? Is there a new John Green novel? What's happening? Well, then finally in 2011, I think in fall of 2011 is when Turtles All the Way Down came out. And it was so quick. He announced in like July or something that got a new book coming out. It's coming out in a couple months in October. I was like, what? I was working on my dissertation at the time. I was almost done. And then he announced that he's got a new book coming out. And I was supposed to have the complete thing finished by over Christmas break so I can start revising in the spring and graduate in May. And he's got a new book coming out in October. So I was panicking a little bit that he was announcing that. So I pre-ordered the book. I got it the day it came in. I read it, made a bunch of notes, and was able to sort of, over about a month and a half, incorporate an analysis of the text into my dissertation at the last minute. It was kind of a whirlwind. I was kind of salty with him for coming out with a book right at the end of my dissertation about his whole collection of writing. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, Turtles All the Way Down is his most recent book, and he's already announced that he's working on another one. He's writing another book, and so we don't have a release date for that one yet, as of now. Also, not long after Looking for Alaska and after An Abundance of Katherines, he and Hank started Vlogbrothers, their YouTube channel, which is the premise was that year, starting January 1st, he and his brother were going to have no text-based communication other than, like they weren't going to communicate with each other, except they were going to send daily messages back and forth to each other on YouTube. That was going to be ostensibly their only communication. They could, if they needed to, make a phone call and call each other on the phone if they needed to, but no emails, no quick texts, nothing like that. Just the videos on YouTube back and forth was the only way they were going to communicate for an entire year. And so they did that, and it was like a really fun experiment. At the beginning, they had like a couple hundred subscribers, and that's it. But then, partway through that year, or maybe toward the end of that year, Hank put out a video of a song he wrote about Harry Potter, because the Deathly Hallows book was about to be coming out, and so he made a song about Harry Potter, and it ended up on the front page of YouTube. And so everybody started following their page after Hank's song came out, and they blew up and got thousands and thousands, and then eventually over millions of followers because of that. Well, that was 2007. They're still going. They still send each other videos. After that first year, they dropped off from doing back and forth every day. Now they alternate. Each one of them does one a week. One does one on Tuesday, one does one on Friday. So there's a video from each brother once a week. So you get 2 Vlogbrothers videos a week. And it's just, and they had a rule. No video can be over 4 minutes. That was their rule too. And if they ever broke the rule, or if there was evidence that they had communication when they weren't supposed to, they could do punishment. So they would do punishments with each other, like you have to eat 36 peeps, or just something crazy like that. And the channel really blew up, and it's still going. It's 13 years now. This is the 13th year that they've been doing it, and it's a big part of their lives, and it's led to a lot of other accomplishments. So their YouTube empire expanded. You got to think, okay, YouTube launched in 2006, and they started this January 1st, 2007. So they were at the very, the cusp, the forefront of this sort of being a YouTuber industry. They were some of the first ones. And so their YouTube empire expanded after that with the crash course videos that some of you like, some of you don't, but they're very useful in school. And it's not just, they host some of them, but there's lots of crash course subjects. SciShow, and there's a show they produce called Sexplanations with a sex therapist who explains all kinds of things about that. And the Microcosmos show that my daughter loves, it's all about microscopic life, and Crash Course Kids. I mean, there's like a whole list of channels and shows that they produce through their company, and it's all free content online, educational content. And so that was kind of a big part of why maybe John wasn't writing for a while, for some years, because he was focusing on Crash Course and their YouTube channels and various things like that. They also have a charity that they started called the Foundation to Decrease World Suck. That's the name of their foundation. And every year around Christmas time, in the beginning of December, they have a 48-hour live stream on YouTube called The Project for Awesome. And they have guests come in, other podcasters and other YouTube people and celebrities they know, like Will Wheaton, they're friends with him, and just different. And they have people from the World Health Organization and Partners in Health and Feed the Children, and they have things like that. They come in, and it's all to raise money for charities that the fandom has selected as top charities that they want to support. And so they raise at least a couple $1 million every year in just that 48-hour time. So that's a big thing. They're really involved in charity, and their fans are really involved in charity. And they also, a few years ago, launched a podcast called Dear Hank and John, where they get on and they read letters from listeners and offer their advice. And it's all it's very funny. It's not real. It's not. It's the questions are real, but their advice is, they're very forthright about how they are not qualified to give advice on most things, and so it's a really enjoyable podcast. So, their lives are pretty full, all from just this, early novel that Green wrote, and then the Vlogbrothers channel. So there's lots of different ways that people know John Green. And I think it's interesting that he is a multiple best-selling author, novelist, YA novelist, but that's only sort of a fraction of what he's done. There are people who know him from Crash Course in school, but they didn't even know he wrote books. And there's maybe people who are really active in the YouTube community, and they've seen their videos, but they haven't really read any of his books. There's people who read him that don't really care about the online stuff. And there are podcast junkies. I'm a podcast junkie. There are podcast junkies who really like Dear Hank and John, but they don't really follow any of their other stuff because doesn't really interest them. So that's one of the things I think that I was wanting to point out about John Green, is that maybe that represents the sort of modern way to be an author. Now, if you're going to have relevancy, you've got to have a Twitter, and you've got to have maybe a YouTube channel, and there's got to be maybe a podcast that goes with it, and maybe your Instagram is lit and you have all these cool posts and whatever. You have to have some sort of a presence. You can't just write your books and then fade into the background. You have to have some sort of fans. And this might be John Green's fault, actually, because he was one of the first people to do this. But fans now sort of expect and demand and feel entitled to having access to the authors that they like. J.K. Rowling might have a little bit before this, but she came into her fame pre-social media, so it wasn't really that significant. So I've heard people make the argument that John Green sort of launched this trend, this new expectation that to be a successful author, especially for young people, you are expected to be accessible. You're expected to have a website. You're expected to do appearances. John and Hank travel every year and do, live shows, live appearances. They record their podcast live on stage. They do readings from their literature, because Hank has published a book now too. So they do readings. They do fun, things on stage. And so you're expected to do live appearances and interviews and answer questions on your website and respond to tweets. And, there's this expectation to be accessible. And for better or for worse, John kind of started that trend to be sort of a pay service to your fans. So however you feel about John Green is one way or the other. And however you feel about the novel that you had to read, or any of his novels, that's one thing. But so if you didn't like reading his novel that you had to read for class, maybe try something else. There's so many other ways to access the world of the Greens, John and Hank. That Hank does music. He has a couple albums, like 3 or 4 albums of music out. It's very good music that he has. John does a different podcast called The Anthropocene Reviewed, and it's very good as well. So we will talk more in class about An Abundance of Katherines, and if there's anything else about Green you want to know. But until then, y'all have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.